Hi everyone, welcome to Lecture 6. Now today we're going to be doing a number of smaller things, some of which may not even pertain to your own discipline, depending upon whether you're in the sciences or the arts or what have you. So I'm going to be starting with a lecture on narration and description. So as I said, if you're in the sciences, a few of these things will matter to you. But if you're in the arts, it will probably speak a lot more to you. Okay, I'm going to be talking about basically how we describe and how we narrate and things like that. Then we're going to get into a lecture on definition. So I'm going to show you where you define, when you define, and that can be a tricky thing to do. But there is one particular thing that I'm going to make sure we all understand, especially for the second paper and then the final paper. Okay, and then we're going to look at one of the articles that I asked you to read, and that is Information Rich, Attention Poor, which I sent to you, so you don't have to worry about that. Then we're going to do the answer key to the quiz, and we're going to look at a works cited. So, like I said, a whole lot of smaller things, but everything will be important in terms of your overall development. All right. So let's just start with narration and description. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the narration and description, and then I'm going to do definition, then I'm going to pause. Then I'm going to give you time to get out the article on information rich, attention poor. I'm going to be very quick with that, all right? There's only a couple of things I want to show you which pertain to your next essay. And then, as I said, we'll do the answers and the works cited. The works cited, I'm going to take a bit of time on that just to show you a whole lot of small things. But don't worry too much if you don't get it all on the first shot. I'm going to come back to that again before we do the exam. All right? So let's start then with narration and description. So basically what we're talking about here, I hope you have your notes in front of you. Okay? We're talking about explaining things in terms of time and or space. That's basically how we distinguish between the two. Description, okay, reconstructs for the reader how something or someone appears. So you'll notice now there's a bit more of an artsy focus on this, okay? But as I said, I'm going to show you in a second how you can actually, you can actually apply this, I should say, to a scientific exploration, okay? Narration, on the other hand, relates a sequence of events, okay? Tells a story. Pretty straightforward. Now, narration is most often organized in terms of time. So you'll notice I bolded time there. Okay. In other words, when you think about a story that you read, a movie or what have you, right? Time plays a very important element. And it's kind of interesting the way that has changed over the years, right? If you think about it, the most common way that we would organize any kind of narrative to begin with would be chronological, right? Beginning, middle, and end. But it's funny how that has changed over the years, and a lot of that has to do, believe it or not, with the way that our society has moved towards a more secular way of looking at the world. Secular meaning a movement away from God. And so if you think about it, many of our stories that we experience now, they don't necessarily begin at the beginning, right? In other words, you might find yourself beginning in the middle, something. It's an old term called medias res, but like beginning in the middle, or even beginning at the end, and then showing how we got to that point. One film in particular, some of you may know this one, if you think of a film like Pulp Fiction, it's impossible to figure out what the actual storyline narrative is in terms of, you know, the can you put a chronological narrative to Pulp Fiction? You can't, right? Like I've done it, I've tried to do it in script writing courses. So the idea with narration, as I said, then we think about it in terms of time. Okay, what is the best way to attack the material in terms of the narrative process? Description, on the other hand, is usually described in terms of space, and a description can be objective or subjective. And we'll talk about that right now. Objective description, and this is where I think for those of you in the sciences, this may help. Objective description is purely factual. Okay. In other words, the writer's feelings do not enter into the written account. So, how about a lab report? Let's say you were utilizing the scientific method. You started with a hypothesis, okay, and then you simply observe and you write down, okay, whatever you describe, whatever events occurred. Now, in the notes, I also have a business proposal, but I got to be careful with that because, in fact, in many business proposals, for those of you who maybe are interested in commerce or what have you, in fact, business proposals can be subjective, right? And in other words, I'm not going to explain this whole thing for everybody, but if you understand the difference between a solicited and an unsolicited proposal, right? In an unsolicited proposal, that's where things will become more subjective. And what I mean by that, simply for those of you who don't understand, solicited means that we've asked you to give us a proposal. An unsolicited proposal simply means you are suggesting that something should be done without the employer even realizing it. That's the only difference with those two, okay? And don't get bogged down with that. I'm just showing you that's what those two things mean, all right? Now, subjective description, on the other hand, that's where the writer's feelings and attitudes or values, they are introduced to create a kind of impression on the reader. And so in that regard, that's really where we're talking more about human interest. All right, like a human interest story. You would see that, say, on the news, okay, where you might start with something very factual, okay, but then they might go into someone's home and take a look at how COVID-19, for instance, okay, how has that affected a certain family or what have you. So that's where you would get more into a subjective description, okay. Now, why do we do these things? Well, basically the idea is in narration and description, we basically use them to develop a subject, okay, or a topic, obviously, okay? So it's no more complicated than that. Now, they can be used in two ways. They can be employed with other rhetorical techniques, like I just said a second ago. We could have both the factual and the human interest, okay? So, or we could do it in terms of even a causal analysis, right? We could do it that way, as we just saw in the last lecture, okay? And this type of writing, more or less, is usually used in, like, say, an article, like a non-academic article, or a report. So remember, some of the things I'm trying to show you here in the course, they're not just for university. They might apply when you graduate, and you'll be able to use these things, right, if you get a job writing, say, for the government or what have you. So you should be aware of those things as well, okay? The difference between objective, subjective, it's handy to have, okay? So we could also then have a descriptive paragraph, okay, or narrative segment, which may develop a point uniquely in an effective way. And so that would be geared more towards the arts. So if you're in the sciences and you don't quite get what I'm talking about, don't worry about it, all right? But if you're in the arts, I think you'll understand what I mean. So in other words, we're almost borderline talking about creative writing here, right? I mean, it could be, you could utilize it for creative writing. Now, I realize the purpose of this course is not creative writing, but I'm just trying to show you different ways, different techniques, how we can employ these types of techniques. Now, an entire essay could also be developed as a narrative or descriptive piece. So think of journalism, right? If you were writing a human interest story, your entire story could be written as a narrative. And the narrative then would be developed, right, as a descriptive piece. So there you go. So like I said, you can see how so far this is more or less geared more towards the arts. But in a second, I'm going to show you, well, actually, I shouldn't say that because, like I said, with a lab report, scientific method, right, you could certainly apply description to the scientific method, right? So there's an example there. Now, to write an effective narrative, okay, keep the following things in mind. And this is also important for any essay that you write in this course. And again, it sounds obvious, but it's not, all right? Select appropriate details. A couple of you have sent me, okay, email suggesting, will these ideas work? And one or two of you had, two ideas that really went well together, but then you might have had a third that didn't seem to go with the other two. So be aware of that for the next paper, okay? Watch out for that. Now, you'll notice in the notes what I have here, and it's something that I was taught, and it's one of the more important things that I remember from university. What you leave out is just as important as what you leave in. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you force something into your essay that doesn't seem to fit, the reader will notice that. But if you don't include something, okay, the reader's not going to question, well, why didn't you include, such and such? Readers don't read that way. And so what you leave out is just as important as what you leave in, all right? So like I said, all I'm trying to say there is don't force stuff in if it doesn't fit. Remember back to our 15 steps? Remember all that? Okay, so just remember that, all right? In other words, does everything go together? Okay, don't force. Instead, make it go together, or I should say, make sure that it goes together. All right? Most of you are doing that, by the way. All right? Just one or two of you that I noticed, you're still trying to force stuff in. You don't want to do that. Okay. Now, every story obviously has a purpose. And you're telling the story to illustrate that purpose. We're back now to maybe more of the arts, right? Now, number 2, arrange the events of the story in the most effective time order. So that's why I was saying before, it's funny how in a more traditional storyline, we would have chronological, A, B, and C, right? Beginning, middle, and end. But in recent narratives, it's interesting how these things have shifted. So it all depends upon your purpose, obviously, okay? So, yeah, keep that in mind. And now, number 3, this is where it's going to sound like I'm talking about the arts, but I'm not. You should keep a consistent point of view. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, if you're a creative writer, and again, listen to me even if you're in the sciences, okay? If you're a creative writer, you know that you don't use a consistent point of view, okay? Or at least, like, in terms of how we tend to write stories nowadays, stories are written from a variety of points of view. But when you think of point of view in terms of academic essays, okay, think about tense, T-E-N-S-E. Always try to remain in the same tense throughout your essay. This won't be possible every time, especially when you're quoting, okay? But for the most part, try to remain, if you're in the past tense, remain in the past tense. If you're in the present tense, remain in the present tense as much as you can. Right? Don't shift back and forth. So that's a stylistic thing that you want to be aware of. Right? So that's why I have, if you take a look there at your notes, all right, where I have tense with a question mark, okay, that's what I mean by point of view. Okay? So as I said, point of view is more creative writing. Tense, no, that's more academic writing. So think about that. All right? And then finally, number 4, use transitions to make your narrative coherent. Now again, not necessarily talking about creative writing. When I say transitions, just watch out for the and then, and then, and then. When we were children, this is exactly how we learned to talk and narrate. We used to tell stories, you know, if your parents asked you, you know, what you did for the day, you would basically say, well, first we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, and so on. You want to think about, instead, basically how to transition through the essay, right? Okay. And we've talked about that already. Remember our favorite words, because, okay, X, comma, Y, although, X, comma, Y, okay, words like that. So those are the kind of words you want to be thinking about, okay? So that's how we transition through, all right? Now, in creative writing, totally different story. And as I said, we're not doing creative writing, so I don't think I need to do much more with that. Now, to write an effective description, now this is where I think for all of you, this is going to come in handy, okay? To write an effective description, okay, this also involves the organizational principles, okay, that basically direct and shape your writing. So let's just think about that for a moment, okay? We won't take too long on it, maybe another 5 minutes or so, but again, I think it's important, right, for the development of your writing skills. So before you write, and this is true of any writing process, creative or non-creative, fiction, non-fiction, before you begin to write, decide on the purpose of your writing. Okay? Why are you writing this? What is the purpose? What is what will be the outcome, okay, of the writing process? Are you creating an argument? Okay? You might not always, right? If you're doing, say, the scientific method, you might not be creating an argument. So ask yourself, okay, why am I writing this? What is the purpose here? Okay, that's number 1. Is your intention factual? Okay? Okay? Are you going to create an objective picture for the reader? And again, that's scientific method, is it not? Or, okay, do you wish to create an impression? That's where we get more into the arts. Okay, so those are the 2 ways of writing a description, obviously. Okay, so let's do that again. Factual, okay, something like the scientific method. Okay, subjective, okay, more of an impression. Now, do we remember, I said this very early on in the course, I'm going to repeat it now. All persuasive writing, okay, I'm going to say this at least 2 more times throughout the course. All persuasive writing is subjective, right? I don't think we can't disagree with that. And if it's a persuasive piece, then you're being subjective. The key is to make it sound objective. Remember, I talked about that before, and I'll talk about it again when we look at the final paper. So instead of using words like I think, I feel, okay, are we starting to remember now? Okay, instead, no, this is just the way it is. So that's the relationship that's kind of the balancing act that you have to figure out. Yes, it is subjective. Your argument is subjective because it's your opinion, but you don't want to make it sound like your opinion. So that's what I mean there. Okay, when I'm talking about this whole idea of factual, okay, versus subjective, etc. So the ideas are subjective, but you want to make them sound objective. So, number 2, keeping your purpose in mind, okay, select the details and words that will most effectively convey the picture or impression you create. Okay, and so again, that's probably more on the art side when I talk about stuff like that. So if you are, say, again, if you were writing a creative piece or something like that, right, the notion of creating the proper word, okay, diction, okay, and then putting those words in the correct order, what we call syntax, right? So I'll say that again. Choosing your words, the actual words themselves, that's diction. Putting them in a certain order, that's what we call syntax. And so great writers, okay, and even academic writers, like even in your essays, you want to think about, okay, do I have these words in the proper order in the sentence? You want to think about stuff like that, especially when it comes to something that we're going to talk about in I think the next lecture or the lecture after that, something like modification, right? So, and again, don't worry about it just yet. But this whole idea, you don't want to just write sentences randomly. Think about the way in which you choose the order of the words. Very important. So let's just do something that is a bit of a reminder back to earlier in the term. Remember how I was telling you about something about gerunds. Remember gerunds? Those are those words that end in ing at the beginning of a sentence, and they're not the subject. So you want to think about that. Okay, do you really want a word like that at the beginning of your sentence? No, you don't. So those are the kind of things that we have to break. All right, we have to break those habits. We simply get used to doing things without even thinking about it. And I keep telling you guys, I was not a very good writer in high school. Okay, I did all right, but I could have improved so much more if I just learned some of these rules. So as I said then, okay, think about the words that you choose. And think about the order that you put them in. Now, I'm not talking about poetry. Okay, I'm not asking you to be poets. I'm simply asking you to think about how you set up your sentences. Right? You'll be amazed if you if you have the habit of doing that, and if you can fix that habit, your grades will improve dramatically. I guarantee you they will. So think about something like that as well. All right? And so once you've selected, I'm on number 3 now. Once you've selected the details, then obviously, and this is true of any writing process, right? Once you've selected all the details that you're going to include, then you want to arrange them in an appropriate order. Now remember, that sounds a bit vague, but where will we find the answer to that? Well, we'll go back to those 15 steps that we talked about earlier. So remember, when I say an appropriate order, what I really mean is you will have to impose a kind of logic onto the paper. So we're getting ready now for our second paper, okay? We're halfway through the course, okay? Actually more than halfway if you really think about how the course will wrap up at the end. And so you want to think about stuff like that, all right? This whole idea of arranging stuff, well, that creates structure, okay? And if you have a really great structure, then the paper will flow. I know, I've said that 1,000 times, I know. But every writing process works the same way. So keep that in mind as well, okay? And so, as I said then, just to close off the first section, remember I said that's 20 minutes, then definition will probably take about 15. Then I'll take a break just so that you can get your thoughts together, and I'm going to tell you a few things. Sorry, I'm looking over all my notes here for the next part. I'll tell you what you need to gather in order to get ready for the second half of the lecture today. So let's do a bit of definition, not too much, but let's just say I'm writing my paper, and on page 4, I introduce the word somnambulist. Now, many of us may not know what that word means, okay? Should I define that? Okay, I'm going to say that again. I'm introducing the word somnambulist on page 4. Should I define that? The answer is no. There are times where the reader will have to look up words. You don't have to define every word, like every big word that you use in a paper. Now notice what I said there though. I'm purposely saying that I introduced it on page 4. In other words, it's not a word that is central to my argument. But when would I have to define, okay, a certain term or whatever? Okay, let's take a look at it right now. Definition, definition, okay, basically creates a kind of contract between the writer and the reader, okay? Communication can't take place, okay, if there are certain words that haven't been explained or defined, okay, for the reader so that the reader understands exactly what you mean. And so basically, I'm on page 3 now, okay? There are 2 ways that we can define terms. The first is called a formal definition, and that's the one you'll want to think about for your first probably 2 years, maybe even 3 years of your undergraduate studies, okay? A formal definition is simply, it's a single sentence, okay, or a clause, remember, a group of words, which define the term that you are dealing with, okay? Now, let's get nice and specific about this. You should always include a definition, okay? When you introduce, now watch what I'm saying here, I'm on the top of page 3. When you introduce an unfamiliar word, okay, or concept, okay, or whenever you assign a particular meaning to a general term in the thesis. Let's say you have a term in your thesis, okay, which could have a variety of different meanings. Well, if you don't define exactly what you mean, the reader's going to be lost. If the reader doesn't agree with, say, your ideology, okay, they may think that you mean the term in one way when in fact you're intend to mean it in another. And so that just causes incredible confusion. So let's do it again. If you have a term that could be ambiguous, could have a variety of different meanings, and it's in your thesis, you better define that. Now the question becomes, well, where do I define it? You would define it in the second paragraph, the first paragraph after your introduction. You would define it immediately, so that then you have set up the terms of agreement between you, the writer, and the reader. Okay, does that make, I think that makes sense, doesn't it? So what type of words then are we talking about? Well, there's tons of words like that, but I'll just throw one at you. Globalization. Globalization can be a positive thing for some people and a negative thing for others. So if you don't describe exactly what you mean by that term, or at least how you're using it, the reader just gets very confused. So think about that. Now, that won't apply to every paper, don't get me wrong. But if you do have a term, okay, where, like I said, the reader could take that a couple of different ways. I've got one word in mind for literature, but I'll do it anyway. Then the reader just gets confused. So let me give you a perfect example in literature, okay? Even though I know many of you are not in literature, the word irony, okay? The word irony, everyone thinks they know what irony means, but in fact, very few can define it. So we throw a word like that around. I'll tell you what it means in just a second, okay? By the way, some of you may be too young to get this joke, but Alanis Morissette's Rain on Your Wedding Day is not ironic, all right? If you know that song, it's not ironic. Nothing in that song is ironic, all right? Although I did have one clever student one time who suggested, but isn't it ironic that it's not ironic? And I thought, okay, that's pretty good. But anyway, so irony simply means to sustain the duplicity of meaning. Look at my hands. Okay, duplicity, okay, 2 levels. Okay, if I called you duplicitous, I'm calling you two-faced. Irony simply means things are operating on different levels, right? Quickly, a soliloquy. Most of you probably studied Shakespeare in high school. A soliloquy. So the actor comes out, and there's a spotlight on the actor, on the actor, and Hamlet. And Hamlet starts talking to the audience. Well, he's talking to himself, but the audience is getting information that no one else on stage has. So now there's 2 levels of meaning going on in the play. The information that the audience has and the information that the characters have. Okay, so anyway, All I'm suggesting here is there are certain terms we throw around all the time without really defining what they mean. So that's all I'm suggesting with definition. Okay, it's, as I said, for some of you it may be important, but for others it may not. But when you see a word like that, I'm going to give you a couple of examples in a second. When you see a word like that, be careful. Okay, because if I'm marking your paper, okay, or if the TA is marking your paper, and you have a word like that, we will probably write in the margins meaning. Okay, question mark, meaning, like, what do you mean by that? So, as I said then, now there's a second thing I could talk about as well. I'm going to come back to the formal definition in just a second, but in your notes, I did include something called extended definition. Now, I'm not going to do too much with that because in a first year course, you really don't need to worry about that. But there are times where, say, later on in your academic career, you might have to write like an entire essay on one word. And I'm not joking when I say that. If you take a look at the notes, you'll see what I mean. So there are times where we need to write things called extended definitions, okay? And that's where literally you could write an entire book on what a word means. I know that sounds crazy, but think of a word like metaphysics. That's a huge term and can mean so many things depending upon the field. I'll give you another one off the top of my head, modern. Many times we think of modern and we connect it with contemporary. But in fact, modern, okay, can mean many different things. If you think of the term modernism, okay, books and books and books have been written on that subject, trying to pin down exactly what it means. So that's what we call an extended definition. But like I said, I don't think we need to worry about that for this course, or even in your first 3 or 4 years of university. You may once you get into graduate school, right? So again, you've got the notes in case you need them later on. Right, like you're going to save my notes for graduate school. But anyway, okay. So let's get into then just some general things on the purpose of definition. I'll show you where it comes from and all of that. And so, as I said, you can see right there, think of a word like metaphysics. Okay, entire books have been written on it, right? And there you go. Now, I'm going to jump over the information on extended definition. Okay, you can see there where it says explaining the abstract, the technical, the changed meaning of words, right? Many words change over the years. But as I said, I don't think we need that. But let's take a look at just the next part there. Let's just say in your introduction, you have a word like freedom. Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean in the existential sense? Are you talking about slavery? Like choice. There's so many different ways that you could talk about freedom. Another word, like the one that I began with today, globalization. Positive, negative. What do you mean by that? A word like justice. Again, I'll give you a quick story. I'm going to come back to this later on. Okay. There's a word that confused me for the longest time. My parents were Catholic, Irish Catholic. Now, don't get angry with me. Like, all I'm doing is showing you an example of how words can be very confusing. And during the 1970s, there was something in Ireland called the Troubles. And I'm sure some of you are very aware of that. And so I kept hearing on the news, okay, about terrorists. But my parents didn't agree with that term. They claimed, okay, that a group called the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, right? It's an offshoot of something earlier on. My grandfather was actually in the original IRA before it became what was known as the IRA in the 70s. But the word terrorist, I never understood it. Because in my mind, a terrorist was a freedom fighter. And I'm sure some of you have experienced that as well, right? You see how terms are thrown around and it can become very confusing. So that's what I mean when I say you want to be really careful, okay? If there is a word that could have a variety of meanings, you want to be very sure that you define it properly. That's all I'm saying, okay? And when we get to, I'm going to show you an example, a better example of that with terrorists and all of that when we get to the actual final essay, all right? I've got a really good example from 9/11, all right? So, and we'll get to it. So anyway, and so let's think about it. I'm jumping down now to the end of page 3, okay? Yeah, we don't have much more to do here with this. We've been already half an hour. It seems like it flew by. The word define is actually interesting. It comes from the Latin, okay? If you take a look at the bottom of your page there, okay, definere. And it actually means to put a fence around. And that makes perfect sense if you think about it, right? Because when you put a fence around something, you're setting up your parameters. And that's what it means. So there you go. So like I said, don't need to do much more about this, except where do we get our definitions from? Okay, that's really important. Now I'm going to say a couple of things that may not pertain to a first year course, but I strongly recommend you start thinking about this once you know exactly what discipline, okay, you're going to be going into. All right, some of you might now still, you might still be questioning, right, what subject matter really do you want to study? But once you really know, then the next things I think will apply. So let's start then with constructing a definition, right? Now, basically, okay, you want to watch out, obviously, for vague formulations, right? Like a fish lives in water. There's my definition of a fish. Okay, obviously not good enough. Now, this next part may surprise you. As you get better with your writing, okay, you will probably not go to a regular Webster's dictionary or what have you and simply write a word-for-word definition, okay, right out of the dictionary for your term. As you get more sophisticated, you will probably start to become aware of reference manuals. In other words, when I'm doing work on literature, okay, I don't go to a dictionary. I have literary dictionaries, literally, okay, or literary encyclopedias. In other words, they're much more specific to the study of like whatever discipline you're in. Every discipline has these things. So as you become more in touch with your discipline, your professors will start to mention certain texts which perhaps act as really, really great reference material. So for now, if you are going to use a dictionary, please, the one you should be using is the Oxford English Dictionary. But as I said, even the Oxford English Dictionary may not be good enough, especially when you start to get into third and fourth year. That may not be good enough for some of the terminology, okay, that you'll need. So as I said, for now, I'm not asking you to go out and buy anything. But once things loosen up at the university, all right, you may want to just, talk to someone in the library, ask them about, reference manuals in your field. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the library, it's not like in high school where you had one librarian. The library has many librarians for specific fields. Like if you're in economics, there is a librarian for that. If you're in English, there's a librarian for that. Engineering, a librarian for that. So, and they overlap, obviously. But what I'm saying is it's much more specific than what you would find in high school. So take advantage of that, right? But let's just do a couple last things, okay? In a dictionary definition, as I said, it probably won't do the job that you want. In first year, fine, don't worry about it, okay? But the quicker you start learning these things, all right, then the better you will get in terms of your writing. So think about that. Sorry, I got a bit off track there. Now, obviously, you want to avoid using the word that you're defining in your definition. And I know some of you know exactly what I'm talking about here, okay? So let's just look at the example. Adolescence is the state of being an adolescent. Well, that didn't help your reader at all right? And yes, that's what we call a circular definition. So watch out for that. All right? And then finally, okay, never put a keyword in italics. Remember, we talked about that. I'm pointing now at you, even though you don't see my finger. Here it comes, all right? All right? Don't put words in italics. Okay? Don't just throw words in italics. Okay? If you're doing that, remember what we talked about in lecture 2. Okay? Chances are you probably need to define that. So what I mean by that is maybe now we're on page 3. So let's get away from what we've been talking about today just for a moment. Let's just say we're on page 3 and you feel the need to put a word in italics. Okay, there's another example where you might need a definition. So in other words, I'm not saying you're only going to need a definition in the one place at the very beginning of your essay. No, you'll probably need others, especially if you have longer essays, obviously, right? But you don't necessarily have to define every big word that you use. You only define words that you notice, right, are going to be central to the arguments you're making. Okay? Sometimes, like I said, it's up to the reader to pick up a dictionary and figure out what the word means. So, and that's more or less it, I think. All right? And so remember, what we're worried about here for now is simply making sure that we understand, right, that if we have key words that could be ambiguous, right, in your thesis, then make sure you clearly define them right away in the second paragraph. And so, excuse me, we're 35 minutes into the lecture, so why don't we take a break here? And as I said, the next part is it's not going to take too long, but I do want to go through a few things with the works cited. So here's what I want you to do right now, okay, as we go to break. Make sure that you have the Peter Nicholson essay, okay, information rich and attention poor. Have that. Again, I'm only going to take about 5 minutes on it, but I want to just show you a couple of things for your second paper. You'll have your works cited is included in the notes, and then I'll do the answer key, okay, for the quiz. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on doing the changing face of literacy. I don't want to bombard you with stuff. The changing face of literacy will be more for the exam. Okay, and so I'm still trying to figure out what we're doing about the exam, so I'm going to hold off on that, and I'll do that in the next lecture. So what you need for now then, as I said, you've got your works cited. I'm going to talk quickly about some confusing words, do the works cited and the answer key, and then the essay. All right, so give me a break. We're 36 minutes in. Yeah, I'm going to pause, and then I'll come back. Okay. So in your notes on page 4, I included some confusing words. These are simply words. I'm not going to go through them all, but make a note of some of these, all right? Accept, accept. I think most of you know the difference between those two, but I have noticed that sometimes people do confuse them. So make a note of that. And affect and effect, that's a really tough one. So notice the way I've tried to describe it there, okay? Basically, yeah. Affect, I'm going to do this without even the notes here. Affect means being done to. Notice my body language there, okay? If I am affected by something, it's being done to me. Effect, on the other hand, I'm doing. Okay? I'm making the change. Okay? That's the difference between those two words. But I have more specific definitions for you there. So try and remember those. That's a difficult one, as a matter of fact. Now, further and farther. This is one that I've noticed. I'm going to do 3. Okay, I'm going to do 3 or 4. Okay, that I just notice. I see these words. So again, what we're doing now is we're fine tuning. Right, we're writing our second essay. We're fine tuning. Okay, we're getting ready for the final paper. Okay, and then the exam. So farther and further. Make a note of that one. Okay, that's a very common one. Farther deals with distance. Further deals with degree. What do I mean by that? Well, farther, I think we all understand what I mean by distance. But when I say further, okay, let's just say you and I are having an argument. Then we take it up a notch, all right? It gets really heated. We just furthered the argument, the degree, okay? And so that's what those two words mean. And so try to remember those, all right? Now, another one, like there's others there that we could talk about, but one in particular, lose and loose. See, spell check is not going to catch these things, okay? So, like L-O-S-E means to mislay, all right? To lose something, I can't find it. Whereas loose, L-O-O-S-E, that means, okay, unrestrained or not tight, okay? My jacket is loose, okay? Spell check won't catch these things. And again, like I know all of us want to get an A in the course, right? Well, if you're making mistakes like that, if you take a look at the course outline, there's no way we can give you an A. These are like just common things that you need to clean up. And again, I've been through it, all right? I made these mistakes. Now, another one, really common, than and then. Again, spell check will not catch. And notice, I've had mistakes purposely on some of the lectures that I've shown you. Grammar check, remember, it didn't catch it. So don't rely on technology for everything, okay? So here we go then, than, okay? That word with an A is used in comparisons, okay? She is stronger than me, okay, or than I, okay? So a comparison. Whereas then, okay, with an E, that indicates time. We will go then. That was terrible, I know, but I'm just showing you how the word works. That is maybe the most common. Okay, so watch out for that. Make a note of that. And then finally, and again, I wouldn't say it's common, but I do find it every year. Woman and women. Woman, okay, with an A means one. Okay, one person. Women with an E means more than one. And again, spell check won't catch that. So I just wanted to quickly go through that. That only took us, 4 minutes? Be aware of those words, though, all right? There are others, but those are the most common. The ones I've included here are the most common, and I've given you definitions and everything else. I just don't want to bore you with that. You've got it right there on the page. So now, what I want to do is turn quickly to information-rich, attention-poor. We're not going to spend much time on this, okay? I just want to show you one quick thing. When we're in group, like students, they kind of wonder, why would you give us such an easy essay? All right, well, I'm going to show you why. The article is entitled Information Rich and Attention Poor. Now, if we were in group, I would say, okay, let's break up into groups and let's figure out the thesis statement. Remember, we talked about co-opting dissent and the thesis statement, all right? Well, this is something I'm going to be asking you about on the exam, and don't worry, we're going to do it again with Changing Face of Literacy. I just want to show you something really simple, okay? 1 minute, 2 minutes. If we read the introduction, okay, 28 years ago, psychologist and computer scientist Herman Simon observed that the most fundamental consequence of the superabundance of information created by the digital revolution was a corresponding scarcity of attention, okay? In becoming information rich, we have become attention poor. All right. Obvious. That's the thesis. Why am I showing you such an obvious thing? Okay? I'm not even going to worry about going through the rest of the article with you. I'll do that when we get to the Changing Face of Literacy. All right. As I said, though, in class, it usually takes maybe about 10, 15 minutes, right? Students feel that it's too obvious. Okay. Why would I give such an obvious essay? Okay, or at least an essay with such an obvious thesis statement? Because the thesis statement reflects very clearly the title of the essay, okay? And that's what I want you to think about. On your first papers, some of you still didn't get that. So you have to make sure, okay, or you should make sure that your title is reflective of your thesis. Again, if you do that, things are working together. And so that then reinforces the flow of the argument. And that's how good writing works, right? You've got a really strong title to begin with, then it's reflected in the thesis. Okay, actually, it's usually the opposite way around. Once you figured out your thesis, then you figure out your title, right? But the title should then be reflective of the thesis, and so you're reminding the reader. Everything works together, reminding the reader, right, of the argument, etc. Keep that in mind for your second paper, because as I said, some of you didn't quite get that on the first one. Okay, so try not to have all these flashy titles, right? Instead, if you need a flashy title, then follow it with a full colon, right? An analysis of, right? But I would suggest instead get rid of the flashy titles for now. When you get to graduate school, right? Then maybe you can play around with these things. I'm simply trying to show you the fundamentals. Okay? All right? All right. Now, the second last thing we're going to do then is the answer key to the first quiz. So let's take a look at number one. Number one, we worked hard and in the end we were successful. Well, if you remember from our comma rules, okay, number five. So we should be able to take, okay, a phrase out and push everything together, and it should work as a nice smooth sentence. We worked hard and, comma, in the end, comma, we were successful. We take in the end out with the commas, we worked hard and we were successful. Perfect. Okay? Now, one quick note on that. We're not just doing the answer key here. I want to show you a few things. Rarely do we have a comma before the word and. There are times where we can do it, okay? And I'll show you that as we get more sophisticated. Okay, we're only halfway through the course. But rarely do we have a comma before the word and, because and is one of those connective words that keeps things going, all right? I didn't say that quite right, but just keep that in mind, all right? Rarely do you have a comma before the word and, Okay, that's all I need to say on that. Number 2, the Senators were the better team. Okay, however, now remember, we can't put comma, okay, before and after however. It's not going to work this time, right? So instead, what we have to do, the Senators were the better team, period. Then we have to put a capital H, however, and then comma. Yes, we could also have done this. The Senators were the better team, semicolon. I don't like that style, but yes, it is acceptable. Then you would only have the lowercase h, the small h, right? But you would still need that comma after however. Okay, so there's number 2. And again, that follows the same principle, right? That would be number 4, right? From the comma rules, that would be number 4. Number 3, that I hope you all got that one. It's simply a comma before the word but. The cold weather is coming, comma, but I've not taken my car in for a tune-up. Okay? Simple. So don't make that mistake in your essays. Comma before the word but. Okay? Except for the one exception, we're not even going to worry about that. Number 4, okay, and that was pretty basic as well. Although the meeting was to be held in the morning, comma, everyone showed up in the afternoon. Okay, so straightforward, although X, comma, Y. Remember, X, group of words, Y, group of words. Okay. Number 5, okay, this one I got to admit, this one may be a bit tricky. The result, comma, therefore, comma, was positive. Now, remember, you should not have changed the order of the words, okay? And so if we take out the word therefore out, the result was positive. And so we know we've done it correctly. Number 6, this was tricky. Well, it shouldn't be, but this is the one that gives everyone problems. Okay, that is Doug Jones. In other words, I'm indicating to you his name. That is Doug Jones's house. Draw a box around his name, Jones. Apostrophe goes outside the box. So it's S apostrophe. Number 7 is the exact same thing. I'm trying to indicate to you there's more than one dog. Okay, look at all those dogs. The dog's play area, D-O-G-S, draw a box, apostrophe goes outside the box. So it's S apostrophe. Now, to find out if you really understand this stuff, I threw 2 at you where you didn't have to do anything. Number 8 and 9, they're fine. They're correct. You didn't have to do anything. Sarah's is simply a plural. We talked about that, right? And the same with Smith's. Many of you got number 8. You did that one correctly, but you didn't get number 9. So remember, okay, belongs to the Smiths. Well, the Smiths in that regard is simply the plural of Smith. You didn't need to do anything. And then finally, number 10, okay, even if it rains, comma, we can still go to the event. Same structure as although, because, okay, etc. And so this brings us then to the last thing that I was going to do today. And I don't want to get too hung up on some of the things I'm about to show you, right? Sorry, I'm just moving all my notes so that I don't lose anything. Oh, I'm back. Let's just take a quick look at the works cited, all right? Take about 5 minutes. No, actually maybe more. So what I'm showing you here, and by the way, this has been posted on Brightspace, all right? So if you lose your notes or if you're not quite sure, it's on Brightspace for you, this one page. Now I'm going to go through it with you, but again, don't worry, don't email me. I don't understand why here and there. Just follow the template. I mean, you can email me if you want, but I may not have all the answers, all right? But I've got the answers here for what we need. So what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to show you how would we document a book. Now, we all understand what a works cited is. This is now in place of a bibliography. If you're in APA, you'll have references, right? Reference sheet. So this is in place now of what we used to do with a bibliography. And it's very similar, very similar. I just want to show you a couple of quick things. And literally in class, I wouldn't take very long on this anyway. So I'm going to show you how to do a book, a work in an anthology, reference, or collection, and then an article, okay? A journal article. A book is very straightforward. You've got it right in front of you now, so I'm not going to take too much time. We would have last name, first name, right? And then we've got, now notice, title of the book, anytime, I told you this I think last lecture, but maybe not, the title of a book, the information on the outside of the book is always italicized, all right? And so we no longer have the city. Instead, we simply have the publisher. Yeah, I did mention that. Remember, we were doing Smith, or Wordsworth, I should say. And then the year. Okay? Boom, simple. Now, before we get into the next one, take a look on the left-hand side. Notice I don't have any numbers. Okay? We do not have number 1, number 2, number 3. The way in which you will set up your works cited, it's all alphabetical. So here's a quick example of what I mean. Let's say I have an author. I've got 3 authors that I'm quoting from in my essay. Okay? And one of the authors, his last name is Aardvark. Literally, A-A-R. Okay, that's the way his last name begins. Even if I only quote Aardvark on the very last page of my essay, Aardvark will still be the first listing in my works cited. Okay? This is MLA, by the way, that I'm showing you. Right? So Aardvark. So in other words, don't have numbers on the side. Now don't worry. In your first ones, some of you had that. You didn't lose any marks. But on the second essay, make sure you've got that correct. Okay? So no numbers on the side. Instead, simply alphabetical by author last name. Now, in the second one, I want to show you something here. And I purposely chose a citation that has more than one line. Okay? So we're going to do a work in an anthology, reference, or collection. So here we would have last name, first name, period. Last name, comma, first name, period. But who is it? Okay? What name is that? That's the author of the actual essay that you're quoting from within the collection. Okay, got it? In other words, we're going to pretend now that we're quoting from like a collection of articles, right? Let's just say I've got a book that has 25 different essays. You probably had something like that in high school. So now, if I'm quoting from one of those essays within the book, right? Well, then the last name, first name, okay, period, is actually the author of the essay itself. Then I have the title of the essay in quotation marks. So that's the difference. The outside book information, that's in italics. The outside name of the book, italics. Inside, that's where we have quotation marks. So that's how you do that. Then notice now we have the italics because now we have the title of the collection, okay, of the book. All right? Then we have edited by. That's a bit new, by the way. Okay, so we actually write edited by and then the editor's name. And the editor's name is actually first last. I'll show you in a second. Then we have publisher, okay, and the year. But then we have something called the page range. Don't confuse yourself with that. Really simple. Remember I said we're quoting from an essay within this big collection. Okay, all you're telling the reader is, well, where will I find that essay within the collection? Well, as you can see, let's go down to the example now, okay? If you just go to the third line just for a moment, well, you'll find it between page 24 and 34. You see that? Where we are on the third line here after Harris, Muriel, right? Now, also, notice that in this style, okay, in the MLA, you actually put the PP period and then the page range, the numbers. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, everything else you can just follow. I don't need to go through everything with you. But I do want to show you one thing. Notice how in all of your citations, the citation on the first line begins on the left-hand justified. Okay? But then for subsequent lines, you tab each line. So just notice there where it says helping, okay, how it's tabbed in. And notice PP is tabbed in. That way, you would only give a double space, and then you would put your next citation or your next author. Okay? And that's how you do it. So it just makes for a clean page, right? Rather than having all your information to the left and everything else. So that's all we're really worried about in the second paper, making sure that you simply have stuff in the right order, right? I can get more sophisticated with that, but I don't want to right now. Basically, you have left hand for the first line, and then tab in for subsequent lines, and that's it. That's it. So that makes your last page look nice. All right. Now, URLs really, okay, we're getting to the point where we need to stop having those in our essays. Okay, you're probably still going to have them in the second paper, but if you're quoting from things from the university database, you really don't have to worry about that, right? You should have enough information that you give us everything you need. All right. And then finally, we're going to do one more thing, and then I think we're done for the day. Okay, it's almost an hour. All right, so we're going to look at a journal, an online journal, and I think most of you know what that means by now, right? Like basically, instead of going to books, you can actually find the journals journals that are specific to a certain field. And so you might find, well, there's 1,000 different things I could talk about with that. So let's keep it simple for now. I'm going to come back to this, all right? All we're doing right now is getting us ready to do this for the second paper, okay? We're simply getting our feet wet. So I'm just going to do a couple of quick things, but as I said, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to come back to this when we look at the final paper, all right? So as I said, just, a couple of quick things here. So again, I would have the last name, comma, first name, period of whoever wrote the journal article. In a journal, there would be more than one article. That's what a journal means, all right? Then I would have the title of the article, so similar to what we just did in the second one, okay? And that would be in quotation marks, and notice where the period is. Then I would have the journal name, and if you haven't used these things before, Ottawa U puts out a journal every once in a while. Queen's University, they have their own journal called Queen's Quarterly, all right, which comes out obviously 4 times a year, all right? And so that's what we mean by the journal name. And as you start playing around with the databases, you'll see what I mean, all right? You'll see the journal name and all that. Now, the one thing I do have to explain, though, is volume. Now, quite often, there will be, it might say volume 24, volume 33. In other words, it's the 33rd journal, published in, a certain range. So you might find a volume number, and that's where that would go. Now, sometimes you won't have a volume number. Instead, like I said, Queen's Quarterly, well, it comes out 4 times a year. It comes out in the spring, summer, fall, winter. In that regard, then, you would literally write spring. That would be the volume, quote unquote, number, right? Okay. So as I said, you're either going to have a volume number, or you'll have to write spring, summer, right? However the journal indicates, their own method. All right. Then you would have the year. Then you would have the page range, just as we talked about. And then notice, and this is strange. Okay. There's something called, maybe not strange, but this is relatively new, and I don't like it at all. There's something called a DOI. All that means is it stands for Digital Object Identifier. And believe it or not, okay, take a look, okay, down at the bottom. MLA now, and I'm not kidding, I took this straight from OWL. MLA now encourages the inclusion of a DOI if one is available. Notice how vague that is. So I'm not worried if you include a DOI or not. I'm really not. Again, as we get more sophisticated, I'm talking really second year, that's where maybe, okay, you might have to think about something like that. But in a first year course, notice what I'm trying to show you here. Many articles don't have these things. And so literally, MLA now encourages the inclusion. It's not mandatory. So don't worry about that. Okay, but I just thought I should mention it to you in case you come across an article and you see these numbers at the end where it says DOI. That's all it means. It's just a new way of categorizing and cataloging. All right, and I got a funny feeling they probably won't be around forever. So quickly now, we're almost done. Okay, almost an hour in. We have then an example, right? Smith, Janice. Well, Janice Smith wrote an article called "The Problem with Language in Michael Ondaatje's Poetry." Okay. Notice where the period is, and then she got it. She published it in something called the Dalhousie Review, okay? And then there's the volume number, the year, and then once again we have the page range, and again you have PP period, then the space, and then where you'll find the essay within the journal, okay? Within the Dalhousie Review, volume 33. And so for now, as I said, really just a couple of things to keep in mind. All right, no numbers on the left-hand side. Instead, now it's purely alphabetical. That's how you will list, right, your citations. You only, okay, sorry, I'll just keep it at that. Then, when you're doing your citations, if you need more than one line, left hand justified for the first line, then indent or tab for successive lines within the citation. A simple double space, not a big space in between, right? And then, keep doing the same thing from there on in. One last thing. Do not cut and paste okay, for your works cited. There's like it really does not look very good when your essay is all in Times New Roman 12, which it should be, including your title page if you're doing APA. Everything is in Times New Roman 12, and then all of a sudden on your works cited, everything is all different. That only shows you didn't take very much time on that. So make sure, right, just make sure that you follow the guidelines here and just type that material in on your own. Or if you are going to cut and paste, well then change the font, make sure that you indented in any successive line after the first. In other words, make it look good, all right? And once you get used to doing that, then every paper will work the same way. So as we close for the day, just remember, you may use APA. Now, APA is going to be different. APA is going to be different from what I just showed you there, all right? But again, you'll find it at OWL. It's not a lot different, but there's a couple of little things. I didn't want to go through both with you, but so I've shown you MLA. APA, bit different, but again, you'll find it at OWL. And as I said, try and make it look nice on the last page, okay? Especially when you get to your final paper. Because on the final paper, these are the kind of things that we will be looking for, all right? So again, on the second paper, just do your best. I've given you what I think you need for now. Do your best, all right? And then, as I said, on the last paper, right, I'm going to come back to the works cited, and we'll do a few more things. Not much more, just to make sure we all understand, right, the nuts and bolts. So that's it. Over an hour today. That flew by to me. And so, I'm going to do the changing face of literacy, as I said. It's on the course outline. It says that I'm supposed to be doing it now, but I want to hold off on that, all right? We've done enough for now. And so we'll do that when we get to the next portion of the course, all right? And so thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.